Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome to another author interview. So today, friends, you're going to have just me, Marie, and a pretty cool interview, if I don't say so myself. Today, you're going to hear me have a great conversation with author Marc Gregson. And Marc isn't just an author. He's actually a teacher first, a middle school English teacher to be exact. And there was something so cool about hearing he's still teaching. He is a best-selling, New York Times best-selling fantasy author. So, if you've been here for a minute, you know that I was all about this one. He is still in the classroom. He is currently writing, or he's actually done writing, and he's in the editing process of his second novel. And it is just such a cool, he's doing all the things, right? All the things that, at least in my head, I'm ooh, I can be, a novelist and teach English and do all the things. I was just so impressed to hear about his very strict work schedule and work ethic that he has for himself. And I want to give you his little about me blurb from his website, and then we're just going to dive into the interview. First of all, the title here is The Reader and the Writer. So that's pretty cool. Marc Gregson is a New York Times best-selling author. He attended the University of Utah, where he graduated cum laude and received his Bachelor of Arts in English teaching. Marc's pursuit of learning has led him into the classroom, where he teaches middle school English. He believes in the power of words and that stories can unite people from all origins. Sky's End is his first novel for teens. He is hard at work on Among Serpents, the sequel to Sky's End. Among Serpents will arrive in spring 2025. The final book in the trilogy, Downfall, will arrive in spring 2026. One of the things that we talk about in this interview is how, as an English teacher of many years myself, I find myself when I'm looking for new and just different texts, and even some of the classic texts or just texts that I've taught for a long time, I find myself kind of wanting more and wanting the lens of an English language arts teacher in the writing of the novel or whatever it is. If I'm looking for something new, I want it to come from an English teacher, somebody who has an idea of what it is that we do with students and what we're trying to the journey that we're making with students in an English classroom, especially when it comes to novels. And so having his perspective as an ELA teacher was very cool. And so I get to ask him about that, ask him about his process. Like I said, his different, depending on where he is in the process of writing a book, the way that his morning and his teaching day and his evening look, I thought was very interesting. And I think you will too. And just the idea that not just being a not that just being a teacher is just being a teacher, if you know what I mean, but he's pursuing both dreams all at the same time. And I thought that that was something that you all, our audience, are going to find very interesting and cool. And I highly suggest picking up Sky's End because it was a very entertaining read. And granted, I am a lover of fantasy. It was a palate cleanse in that it was genuinely for a young adult audience, for a younger audience than the adult things that fantasy can also lend itself to. This was truly something that you can have in your classroom and not have to give any sort of content warnings. And I think you will enjoy it as much as I did. So without any further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. All right, everybody. I am so excited to have here with us today a teacher author, Marc J. Gregson, who is going to be talking to us today about a bunch of different things. You can tell I'm excited because he's not just a teacher. He's not just a writer, but he's a fantasy author. And listeners of the podcast, you know that that's my bread and butter. And when I don't want to do anything else and I just want to curl up with a book, you know that that book is going to be a dystopia, a fantasy, a sci-fi fantasy, a somewhere. It's going to have dragons is what I'm saying. And so I'm excited to get into it. Welcome to the Brave New Teaching Podcast. Marc, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you so much for having Marie. I am super excited to be able to talk about my book and have this opportunity to say hello to everybody. So hi, I'm Marc.
Yay, welcome. So Marc is a classroom teacher currently. Before we started recording, we were talking just a little bit about being in the classroom and all of the delights that go along with classroom buildings and school buildings. You know, like we've all, I'm sure those of you listening who are teachers, you're like, yes, I've had my fair share of fun times in a school building and the infrastructure of schools. But I wanted to let you introduce yourself, even though we've already begun the episode with a little introduction of just kind of like, tell us about you, about your journey. You said you're in your 6th year of teaching?
Yeah, so this is my 6th year of teaching. I'm a middle school teacher. I have taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. In fact, they keep moving me up. So I have students this year that I've taught all of their middle school years, 6th, 7th, and 8th
them.
grade.
That happened to me one time that I got kids for a solid 4 years. I started with them as 9th graders. It was the class of 2021, in fact. Why do I remember that? Because I do. And I had them as 9th graders. And then I ended up teaching 10th grade and 11th grade. And there was like a handful of kiddos who I had all 4 years. And it's cool. Isn't it cool looping with kiddos that many times?
I mean, you're able to build relationships with the kids to such a degree that you weren't able to before. And like when they came into class this year, the very first day, you know, we did book speed dating. I wasn't going over disclosures and rules and procedures. It was like they came in, they were expecting to have, oh, let's go over our disclosures. Let's talk about my procedures. This is where my pencil sharpener is. No, it was like, it was like we got books out on our tables and we're going to do book speed dating. So that was a lot of fun.
That is really fun. Yeah, I that is one of the things of being like an English language arts teacher that I hate having to say goodbye to kids. You know, like I have a school that's a quarter system. Do you get your kiddos from like August through June all year?
Yeah, August to June or May. It just depends, but usually
just depending on when you end. Mm-hmm. We used to have that when we had a semester system, but we changed over 6 or 7 years ago. What is time, right? To a quarter system. And so now I get all new kids in January every year. Like it's basically 2 first days of school. Wow. And it's, but I love the idea of being able to have kids more than one time. So whenever I get switched around, like you were saying, you keep getting bumped up in like grade level. It's like it's a pain in the butt sometimes because you're like, okay, I have to like retrain my brain to think in that grade level. But then at the same time, you're like, yeah, but I get to have some of the same kids, which is cool. And like you get to have them more than once and you don't have to say goodbye as soon, I guess.
Yeah, I've often found, so I teach them like when I'm teaching them up until like March, that's when the relationship building really has like, it's blossomed by that.
Yes.
Totally. And then you're saying goodbye to them like 2 months later.
I know.
But for me, I've been really fortunate because I've been able to teach a lot of them for so long. So it's been really fun.
That is so cool. Well, so which came first, the teacher or the writer?
Writer. Probably the first time I decided I wanted to start writing, I got a Halloween project when I was in like 7th or 8th grade.
Okay.
And my teacher said that I could write either like a 2 or 3 page spooky story, or I could write chapter 1 of a story. And I ended up writing like 15 pages of a like a killer squirrel. And so I kind of was
so cute.
I was kind of bit by the bug, the writing bug. I've been writing ever since. I actually wasn't originally planning on going into teaching. I went to college a little bit later. And when I went to college, I was planning on going into video game design with an
Oh,
emphasis
that's
in
cool.
storytelling.
I was going to say, well, that's story writing just in a different medium. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really interested in that. But I was also I took a children's literature course because I just love children's books and, middle grade and young adult and all that. And I was deathly afraid of public speaking. Like, it was the scariest thing ever for me. I'll never forget, like, one of my professors, she said this, I think it was like my folklore professor. And they said, we're going to learn about two things that people are afraid of the most: death and public speaking. And, and so I was really afraid of it, but I had to get up and do a presentation on all these books. And after I did that presentation, my professor pulled me aside and she's like, "You're going to make a really good teacher, Mark." And I was like, "What?" Like, it blew my mind. And so, yeah, that's kind of led me to where I am now, just like able to be comfortable in front of people, like probably seen that cover reveal video on Instagram. That 10 years ago, I would have never gone up in front of like 500 people and like cried while seeing my cover for the first time.
So it's so sweet. And I'm really excited, like, speaking of, talking about building relationships with your kids. And it seems like you've got such an amazing community surrounding you, both, well, at school, and then also like lifting you up as an artist, as an author. That is just so cool. But okay, we have to, weave our little path here. So you're in college, you have decided, I'm going to be a writer. And then your professor says, hey, you're going to make a great teacher. And you're like, drop the mic. What are you talking about? So then, like, how does that get you from college student to English teacher, right? ELA?
Yeah, ELA. So I guess like it was like a spark in my head and it got me thinking. And my mother-in-law, she's a math coach for one of our local districts here. And so I went and picked her brain about it. And then I went and I started taking some classes where I was going to do some hours in the school just to see what it was like. And I went to high school and I went to middle school. And I just loved it so much. The kids and just the whole environment. And it was strange, too, because when I was a kid, I mean, school wasn't my favorite thing. I wanted to go and just like run around and play, but as as an adult, I love the environment so much. And I was like, these are my people. This is my place.
I love that. So have you only ever taught in the middle grades, or have you taught high school as well?
I haven't taught high school. So I kind of was deciding between applying for high schools and middle schools. And, like one of my professors, he said that there's a special place in heaven for middle school teachers.
He's 100% correct. Yes.
And I was like, I think I want to reserve one of those spots. Because
one, please. Yeah.
They're weird. They're funny. And I mean, like, I make bald jokes and they think I'm a comedian. Like, it's
right. Yeah. It's like their exact brand of humor. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And they're not like, swimming in apathy.
Sure.
So I really like the age a lot. So yeah, I've been teaching for 6 years. I've taught almost all English. I did teach for 2 years Avid. I don't know if you're familiar with Avid. Yeah.
Oh, I've taught Avid, all the levels. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Teaching that remotely was really difficult, but
yeah, I can imagine. About as easy as teaching a drama class remotely. Yep.
Yeah. And that's actually, I've had some really great experiences with my Avid students. Like, we have those moments where you're trying, like, simultaneously you're writing and you're trying to get published while you're trying to be the best teacher you can for your students. And so we would do our talking circles and things like that.
Yeah.
I'd usually be the one to start the discussion to really, set up the right culture for how I wanted us to be responding to this. If it's going to be a silly sort of response, then maybe I'd give a silly response to the question. But, I opened up to that group of kids and I started telling them about that I was a writer and I had been trying to get published for, it was about almost 20 years at that point when I had been trying. And so I'd been trying to get an agent, which is, if you want to get traditionally published by a publisher, you have to get an agent first. And Sky's End's not the first book I've written. I mean, it's my sixth one. It's my debut,
Wow.
but it's going to be the first one that people are going to read. But I just kept, trying and trying and trying. And I told my students all about that. Like, it was just a dream of mine. And it was really special sharing with those students when I got to tell them that, guess what? An agent offered me, and they all clapped and they were really excited. So that was a great day.
Well, so let's dig into that a little bit then. So you just said this is your sixth novel, but it's your first public release being published. And you were actively teaching at the same time as writing and getting this book published. I guarantee you there are a few teachers out there listening to this podcast that went, because you're saying that you were both teaching during the day and then going home to your family, being who you are, and then also writing a book, editing a book, and sending it off to your editor and to your publisher will you please tell us about that process? Because it's just so much, but I can also see how much it lights you up to talk about it. So it's obviously a work of passion, but then there's also only so many hours in the day, right? What was that process like?
Okay, so essentially I have to start prioritizing things.
Sure.
When I'm in editing and I'm working on a book, I have my family time, I have my teaching time, and then I have my writing time, and I don't have time for pretty much anything else. I wake up early in the morning, probably like 5:30, and then I write for about an hour. And then I get ready and I go to work, and then I get to work about an hour early. And so getting to work an hour early does make it easier for me to not have to stay after. Then I usually eat, a pretty early dinner, and then I write for about another 2 hours. So roughly I'm writing for about 3 hours a day. And it's broken up between before and after school. It could be really challenging. I just actually went through with the sequel, The Sky's End. I just got my edits back to my editor on New Year's Day. I turned them into him.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So, I'd been through the gauntlet just like in between the middle of October all the way until January getting that done. It is very exhausting, but at the same time, teaching and writing are both my passions. And so I enjoy them both so much. So as long as I'm feeling that passion and I'm feeling like I'm getting something really profound from it, then I'm okay. But it is basically I have to sacrifice a lot of other things. I just don't have as much time.
So when you were first teaching, which isn't that long ago, right? When you were a brand new teacher, you were still writing at the same time, correct?
That's right. Now, my first year of teaching, it was pretty overwhelming to be writing at the same time.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I was every single night and just grading. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I was every single thing I was focused on and grading every single detail. And I was grading the About You papers. I mean, no offense if you grade the About You papers.
You're far from the only person who has felt like you had to do that, right? Because you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And when you're brand new to anything, you focus on things that you think you're supposed to simply because you don't have that gift of wisdom yet, right? So no, I my line of questioning is because I feel like we have teachers who are either new to the profession or just are in this post-pandemic shutdown status with kids where it's I can barely even get my feet to move to the kitchen to get dinner. I might just turn over and grab a cracker that I found in my bag and eat that for dinner if it means I don't have to walk any further once I get home, right? And so I think hearing though the very transparent, this is how you did it. You are up super early in the morning, you go to work, and you're very regimented about your timing and you enjoy it at the same time, right? That's pretty special.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky. I'm pretty fortunate because both of these are teaching wasn't originally my dream, but it's turned into that dream job. Right. And then cool. Writing has always been my dream. And so, every day, there's rough days, but in general, I come home feeling pretty good about my day at school. I've got good students. I'm excited about the relationships we've built. I'm excited about the growth, the aha moments you see with a kid that day when it clicks. And those things are really, invigorating. But then also, when there's lulls in the day or there's a moment where I have a chance to think, I usually have, like in my classroom, I'm usually playing like Zen music or relaxing music in the background. So sometimes there's lulls in the classes, there always is. And I can hear that music, and sometimes I just kind of sink into my imagination, and then I get transported into my books. And so then I'll usually jot things down on like my notepad of like little ideas and things, so that when I do have a chance to write, I can go home and I get excited. I get this like squeeze in the gut, kind of excited, want to go and explore this idea and see what happens.
That's really cool. So I actually am very interested in that exact aspect of being in creative mode and being in teaching mode. And it sounds like they're not that different.
Yeah, I've actually found that like when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, like I feel like that they're both siphoning from the same part of my brain. The creative part of my brain is both getting siphoned. And so that's actually part of the reason why I am waking up early, because I get really good creativity as soon as I wake up. And so then I can jot things down. Like I can start typing up something. Maybe I'll get, 500 words down. I guess it depends on the morning if I'm feeling inspired or not. And then I can leave a Post-it note and be like, this is where I stopped and this is where I want to go next. And so like maybe on my drive or maybe on my lunch, or if there's a lull in the class, do you do like reading comprehension tests? Well, not reading comprehension, but like the reading inventory. Do you guys do the reading inventory? It's like it assesses a student's reading Lexile level. And we do those.
Not at my school, but I'm at high school. So I'm sure that they do some version of that at our middle schools. I think that's pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah. So like those are days we do those 3 times a year. And so, those, and when those happen, I just have peaceful music in the background and I'm just actively monitoring. But I mean, I'm into my head a little bit.
I mean, truly, it's standardized testing. You're a warm body in the room who's got a credential. Yes. Yeah. Right. We've all had those days where you're like, I'm just here because legally they need a body in the room.
Yeah. And those are the days that are really tough for me, because I get so many ideas and I'm super eager to go do them, and I can't yet, so I have to be patient.
Right, you're like, is the bell ringing yet? So how much of your how have you ever had like a kid give you an idea, or like when an idea is sparked for maybe a conversation with your students? Does that ever sort of happen? I ask because I guess what I'm equating it to in my brain, most of my creativity comes from I'm a talker, obviously, and being around my students, they help me think of new ways to teach them things just by talking to them. I'm like, most of my creativity and like the big ideas I have come from like how I can introduce material and ideas and connect with kids, which is probably what you're talking about, that siphoning from the same place, right? It's all that same, how can I help this story or this information get into their tiny little 18-year-old brains in the best way that I can. And so my creativity comes a lot from them and their energy and their just straight up teenage strangeness. Have you had those sorts of things happen where a kiddo is talking and you're like, boop, boop, I know exactly where I can go with this?
I would say that I can't think of like a specific instance, but more maybe in general. Specifically with the way that kids talk to each other and how they address each other versus the way that they address adults. And that's something that I've noticed. And also just like it's wild to me, like every year that the kids come in with new lingo, that there's a new thing that everybody's saying. So that stuck with me as well. And so when I was, writing Sky's End, I wanted to make sure that my characters were saying things that sounded unique and different, but also somewhat familiar.
It's interesting too, because reading, let's dig into the book, shall we? Because again, fantasy lover, I'm super excited. I need you to know how impressed I was as a reader with your almost nonchalant world building. Because it's a YA novel. I mean, I know you know this, but I just need to make sure our listeners know this. It's a YA fantasy novel that plunks you like from line 1, plop, right into this world. But it's not sometimes when I read fantasy YA, I'm being whacked over the head with, here comes another idea of how this world is being built. Here's more information about the background of the world. But I'm just in it and I'm immersed in a way that's also not super confusing. Like you've struck a really nice balance of world building that feels organic and not overwrought or like really confusing and at the same time. And your characters sound like kids I know. Even though they're from this fantasy world, hovering in an island in the sky, they sound like, and so I can see where that influence comes in, because sometimes when I read characters that are teenagers or preteens who are written by people who obviously only interact with a small handful of people in that age group, you're like, oh, that's not how kids talk. But like, I see them every day. And this is how kids talk, and it feels authentic. And so that's really cool. It's like that, like boots on the ground sort of research, right, into your character development.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really wanted to write something that was very accessible for readers and for readers of all types, from reluctant readers to people who just really are big into fantasy. And I'm the same way as you. I have a really hard time with just big, giant dumps of exposition, info dumps. I have a hard time with those. And I really wanted I'm going to throw you into this world, and we're going to experience it through Conrad's eyes. And you're going to find out things when you need to know about them. Actually, a little bit, I when I was writing this book, I had backwards design, in teaching in mind. I thought about that, like, where am I going to try to get to, and sort of reverse engineering how I'm going to get to that point. And so, like, if you're reading this book and you see these giant monsters, for example, one of the things I do with the world building is, instead of being like, and this is a list of all the things these things are capable of doing and everything there is to know about them. No, each time you run into those things, you're going to learn something new about them.
Yep.
I assess myself as a teacher, like, and some lessons, unfortunately, it is what it is. It's going to be boring. I'm going to do my best. And I tell my students, I'm like, we're going to just plow through this. We're going to do our best today. But I try to assess things, and I'm like, how can I make my lesson more engaging for my students to make sure that they're focused and that they're learning? And I apply that same thing to my own writing, and I reflect a lot. A lot of what I do is reflection. And so I'm like, do I really need this little tidbit about the world? Or does it slow down the pacing? Or maybe does it need to be somewhere else? So, yeah.
So from idea through final draft, do you go idea, like brainstorm, storyboard? I guess I'm wondering, what is your creative writing process? And then how much creative writing do you do in your classroom?
So I am what's called so there's discovery writers, and then there's your plotters. And like George R. Martin and like Pierce Brown and myself, we are discovery writers. We make it up as we go along. And then there's your plotters, and that's like J.K. Rowling, who like maps out 7 books. I used to.
That would be me. I would be I'm a plotter. Just gonna put that one out. It's gonna surprise not a single listener.
I like the process of discovery, and so that's where I go. But I always have some sort of end goal in mind that I am building up toward. And sometimes that's either at the end of a chapter or it's the whole book.
It sounds like a really good balance between knowing that there is an end. I mean, like when you think about lesson design and curriculum design, it's the same sort of a thing, like you were saying before, where I don't have to know exactly every single step a student's going to take along the way to getting to the end, but I do need to know what the end is, so that when I pivot, because I'm going to have to pivot because they're real live students, when I do pivot, the whole thing doesn't get blown up. But I like, so that's what it sounds like your writing process is. Your discovery, and you're going along the way, but whatever path you end up on is going to lead somewhere that looks like what this idea is.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so it often does result in me doing lots of massive like rewrites and cutting things, removing characters, adding characters in. And that's, constantly like, does this need to be here? That's always what I'm asking myself. Does it need to be here? Is it building a character? Is it advancing the plot? If not, is it world building that's so crucial that it needs to be in there or not? That's something I'm constantly asking myself.
How much creative writing are you able to pull into your classroom with your kids?
I wish I could have more. I wish I had more time.
Don't we all? I know, me too.
I do in my 7th grade classes, we do a personal narrative. And with our personal narrative, we have a big packet. We break down, we create like a plot diagram or the Freytag model. And then we break down our own stories. And then I guide them through sensory details. I teach them how to really engage the reader's senses, because that's going to trigger their imaginations and make them make connections to things, even if those things aren't real. Usually with our personal narratives, I always give exceptions to students who want to write something a little more fantastical, but usually it's based on something in our lives. That one's actually one of my favorite units is going through the personal narrative. I like to first tell them a couple stories from my own life to set examples. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories, and that's always a fun day. My students like to hear me tell stories. So
you never get to know kids the way that you do through their writing. Like
Right.
There's just a special reading what a student has written, especially if it's a journal entry or a personal narrative draft or something like that. It's a different type of bond that you are like getting to know them from a completely different angle than like their math or science teacher necessarily is going to be able to get to know them. I have a colleague actually who's teaching an honors 9th grade class. And she was like, we're going to do short story writing, but you just made me think of this. Like your teacher, where you said you were in 7th grade, right? But instead of writing a short story, we're going to write the first chapter of a book. And her students got so into it that they wanted to like blow it up into a full blown novella. And so they're now in small groups and writing like novellas as a class, because we have finals coming up soon. So we're going to have a whole new batch of kids in like 2 weeks. And so she's starting to wrap it all up. But like, the way that she thought she was going to have to like force this upon them. And they were like, can we just skip Romeo and Juliet? She was like, well, listen, hold on. They just took off with it. And we're like, can we do nothing else except for write our books? And she was like, I wish, but we can work it in. So like, she's found ways then to try to like weave that in. Cause what she thought was going to be a 2-week project ended up being this thing that the kids are like, we have free time. Can we go back to our books? And she's like, you nerds, this is so cool. But yeah, they're like writing their books and it is the best thing. And I'm sure your students are like, yeah, that's like my favorite thing we do is our personal narratives, because it's something that is a part of them, right? That they, not just that they connect to, but that they are connecting with others through their own story. Do they have to like read it to each other? Like how do they share them at all? Or is it more personal?
That one it's entirely up to them. I always give them the option. I go, okay, we're going to get with like a partner. We're going to trade our computer, or we're going to share it through Google Drive with each other so we can read each other's, or we're going to whisper read it to ourselves if we're afraid to share it with somebody else. One of my favorite things. So the year I got my book deal, I had a batch of kids that were like that. They were all super excited about writing, and we did our personal narrative at the beginning of the year that year. And I had some kids who were like, they wanted to turn, because I also tell them with their personal narratives, if you don't feel comfortable, then you can write a story as if it was a personal narrative. It doesn't have to be real. I had probably about 9 kids that year who all decided that they were going to turn that personal narrative into a full-blown book. And so I have on my list of fast finishers that I have on my whiteboard, I actually said, write your book. Like if you finish your work early, then you could write your book. And they were working really hard on it. I had one student who was really funny. So he would have his computer out, and as I'd be walking around the room, he would like try to like keep the screen moving toward me. Like I would suddenly see his words and become enraptured in them.
And all of a sudden just start reading them. I can totally see that kid in my classroom that would be doing that. That's so funny. How many of your students have read Sky's End?
So it just launched on Tuesday. I've had like, let's see. So a lot of them ordered theirs online. So I started signing books yesterday at school, and they got them yesterday. I signed 12 yesterday and then 9 today. I'm tracking. I signed
as you should be.
I got 21 so far. I'm going to get more tomorrow, probably even more over the weekend. I had one student who came up to me. She got it last night, and she was already halfway through it. And she came up, she was super excited, and I signed her copy. And then I have a former student, his brother came to me today to tell me that, hey, such and such, my brother, he wanted to say that he read your whole book and he just loved it so much.
Oh, that is so sweet. That is so sweet. So they've just got to think that is the coolest thing in the world. Like, not only are you an actual person, like they don't plug you into the school wall when all the kids leave. You go home and you have a life, but you also wrote all of these pages. Like,
yeah.
Right out of your own brain. Because when I say like, oh, I have a podcast, or when my students find my Instagram or my YouTube, they're like, when were you going to tell us? And I'm like, what are you talking about? They get so funny. Like, they think that this is all we do. And so the fact that you've got like literally, a thick book that you can be like, this is also what I do. Like, I'm flipping the pages here. That must just blow their tiny little brains.
Yeah. It was interesting today. I also had a fun story. So we're getting ready for our review because we're going to have a quiz tomorrow. And before we're getting to the review, a student, she raises her hand and she goes, Mr. Gregson, can I just say something? And I pause and I'm like, yeah, sure. And then she hoists her copy of Skies End Up in the Air. She goes, this book is so good, Mr. Gregson. And I was like, ah. And then there were other kids who were like, my copy hasn't come in the mail yet.
You're like, I'm so sorry. I'll get on that for you, kiddos. Do you ever do like close reads? Like, I would pull a page from like my book and be like, let's see if anybody notices. Like, do you have take a look at it?
Last year, the whole school was buzzing after that cover reveal. It was just wild. And
I want to hear that whole story for the podcast after this, because I feel like that would be a great little motivator.
But on the last day of school, I told my students, I said, if you want to come in, because we're supposed to be organized. We're supposed to be going to our second, our third, our fourth, and fifth period, on the last day of school. But it's kind of
a free for all. Like,
the
rules are there are no rules. Yeah, we're just trying to get everybody across the stage of graduation at high school. Last day of school, we're like, listen, 9th, 10th, and 11th, we don't actually care about you anymore. We need these kids to go across that stage so that we don't have to be responsible for them anymore. I get it. It's just total Wild West. Yes.
And so I told them, I said, because they were like, we want to read it, Mr. Gregson. And I'm like, I will read chapter 1 tomorrow. And so if you want to come in, you come in. And there were probably 40 or 50 kids who came in. I actually did a recording of it. It's on my YouTube.
Yeah, that's cool.
About a 30-minute, and you can hear the kids in the background reacting as things are happening. That was pretty fun. So
that's really cool. So yeah, let's talk about that. Like, how did you decide that school was the place for a cover reveal?
So my publisher, this was back in probably about April. My publisher told me to start thinking about what I wanted to do for a cover reveal, and that we were going to have our cover reveal that was going to go officially online on May 31st.
Okay.
And so I'd seen on TikTok some places had done countdowns, and then they would show their cover, and it was like an author sitting in their office, and then at the end they would snap their fingers and the cover would be in. They're always really exciting, and I was like, I want to try something like that. But then I had this sort of idea. I'm like, well, what if I share my cover with my students? But then I looked at
cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, what if I share it with my students? But the problem is the school's getting out May 26th and the cover reveal is May 31st. And so I email my publisher and I say, is there any way possible that we can have my cover reveal shown to my students early before the official one is public? And my publisher replies like an hour later and they say, under one condition. I'm like, what's that? They're like, you see the book cover for the first time with your students.
That is so like neat.
And I just kind of like sank into the couch and I thought about it and I chuckled a little bit and it got me all flushed.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
It's like, I had seen sketches, but I hadn't seen the final thing. And then I told some of my author buddies, and like, there's no way I could do it. I couldn't wait a month and a half and wait to see my cover. But I was like, okay, let's do
you've
it.
waited this long. Yeah. Like what's another, yeah. It's not like you're just sitting around and waiting. You're still teaching full time during the day. Like your days are full. So, okay, fine. Yeah.
And so we, they sent the cover to my wife, so she would send it to the principal at the school. So I remember like, it was there in my wife's phone like a week before the reveal. And I remember thinking, I was like, it'd be so easy for me to just go over and see it.
Yeah. How did she do that? Or was she torturing you with it, or was she just pretty tight-lipped?
She just smiled.
That had to have been so hard for her too, knowing like how happy you were going to be and how cool it looks too.
I mean, I asked her, I was like, it's good, right? And she's like, oh yeah, it's really good. And like, I was confident.
No, that's pretty bad. Yeah,
I didn't no, it's not what I wanted. No, I mean, like I had a pretty good idea it was going to be excellent because Amir Zand, the artist, I'd seen his portfolio and he is just a fabulous illustrator and cover artist. And so, yeah, it blew my mind.
He brought to life talk about that world building that we were talking about before. Like it's there it is.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's phenomenal. Conrad down there in the bottom right of the cover, he was so like in the sketches, it was really just a very rudimentary thing. It was just like almost like a blob. And so I had
just
no
idea.
idea.
Yeah.
I knew that the coils of the sky serpent, the Gorganton, I knew it was going to have something with a Gorganton curling around an island. But yeah, Conrad was really not defined in the early sketches that I saw before the final thing. And then there was this buzz in the school before the cover reveal. Like I had students who were telling me, my parents are checking me out right after the assembly. I'm just here for the assembly. And then I'm going to go to summer.
And then I'm done. Yeah.
I mean, like you never know how middle schoolers are going to react sometimes, but
you really don't. I mean, you don't know how kids are going to react, period. But especially those very special middle school years. Well, and like, what a great role model and example for students to see not just a grown-up doing things, but a grown-up who they know and obviously care for. If they all came to support you like that, to see you chasing your dreams and still not being like, oh, well, now that I'm writing my book, bye kids, but like bringing them into the fold and creating community around your other passion or your first passion, writing, and then also like including your second passion, these kids in with it. It's such a, I keep saying special because I can't find a better word because it's too late in the day and my vocabulary has lapsed. But like what a very unique way to bond with your students and then to say goodbye. But like that is something that every single one of them will always remember. I'm sure of it.
Yes. Yeah. And those, honestly, so there is another story that I can tell you with these kids. And part of the reason why I wanted to have that cover reveal and why it was so special was that a lot of those kids, they were in 8th grade and they were about to go to high school. Mm-hmm. And those kids had been in the classroom with me when my agent emailed me to tell me that Peachtree had just made an offer on Sky's End. And when that happened, I shouted, I was like, oh my gosh. And then the kids looked back at me and like, I probably went pale. Like one of the kids, maybe when I was purple, I don't know. One of my students told me later and they thought like I got up and I was in front of the class and I pulled off my glasses and I was probably like massaging the bridge of my nose. And I think one of the kids, he said like, it's okay, Mr. Gregson. He probably thought like somebody had said something just it's aggressively cruel to me or something.
Right.
And then I told him, I said, Sky's End just got an offer. It's going to get published. And then they just exploded with cheers. And so I was thinking of those kids and I was like, before they go to high school, because they kept coming in and asking me questions for updates. And they found out like, hey, we found out in January 2022, when's the book coming out? January 2024. For them, they're like, that's forever. And
We're not even going to be around. We will have moved. We will be members of AARP by then. Yeah. They are done.
And so that was really one of the things I was like, it was really important to me to find a way to make sure that those kids, that we got to share that experience of seeing the cover, even though they weren't going to be at the school with me when the book launched, they got to be in that experience of seeing the cover with me.
That's really cool. So, okay, let's talk then. Speaking of covers and speaking of books, what can you tell us about book number 2? Since you said that one has already been submitted. So Sky's End, first book is out now. Do you have a title for your second
Yes.
in the series?
Book 2 is called Among Serpents.
Among Serpents,
yes. I actually, you want to hear something just real quick with my students? They voted on that title.
Oh, that is so cool.
I put up like 4 titles and I let them vote, and then we kept tallying them up over class after class. And I'd be like, okay, third period voted for this one, and this one was in second place. And then we went through it and they voted for that one. And I kind of like it too. So it's stuck.
It's really cool. Well, and like talk about audience outreach, right? Like there they are. That's the young adult audience. Yes, tell us what you want. Like what a great focus group.
I would say like it's going to be interesting because this is going to be, how do I navigate like promoting book 2 without spoiling book 1? So the best way I could say this is that if you like the intensity and the pacing of the second half of Sky's End, then I think you're going to love all of Among Serpents. It's fast, It's intense, it's brutal, very passionate. And Conrad really has some struggles in book 2, as he should. Okay. So lots of new creatures and other exciting things that, yes, there's massive spoilers at the end of book 1. So I just have to tread carefully, but those have huge ramifications into book 2.
And there's so much where he's in his own head, but not in a typical, like, we get it, kid, like, yeah, kid, life's hard sometimes. He's in his own head in a, yeah, this is really hard, and also I need to keep moving. Like, I don't know, there's just something very endearing about the way that this teenager is in his own head, where sometimes when teenagers who are written to books, fictional kids are, it goes back to, obviously you are with kids and you get how they tick, because it's not gratuitous. It's very like, this is how kids are. So I'm excited to see that develop even further. I think that's going to be really cool.
So the audiobook, which is fabulous, Vikas Adam did the audiobook, and one of the questions he had, or they asked me, was like, when reading Conrad's voice, I wanted to, like, when we were looking at the different narrators, I was like, we want to find somebody who can express like a youthful toughness, but not a character that sounds whiny. Frustrated, yes, but not whiny, because
not a pain in the ass. Yes.
Yeah. and actually in Conrad's world, complainers are called lotchers. They're called, like, they're considered weak. And so that's like a really fine line, is like making sure he sounds like he's frustrated rather than just complaining. That was a tough balance. Conrad was very difficult to write, especially because in the early drafts, he was incredibly unlikable.
I could see that. I mean, I can see where that would be a hard... Like, where do you find the redeeming qualities of a kid who's had such a hard go at it and was brought up in something so different than what he currently finds himself? I'm also trying not to give any spoilers. Like, such a hard whiplash change of life through trauma. And then, he should be unlikable. Like, by all means, he has every reason to just be completely embittered and unlikable. And yet he's so endearing.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're saying that. That makes me so happy, because I worked super hard on trying to make sure that Conrad would be endearing and that people would like him, and that you can tell he's trying. He is trying. He lives in a world of moral grayness. And the characters around. Yeah.
So do we. So do our kids. I seriously, as I'm reading, I always, when I read YA especially, I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, well, who are the first 5 students that come to my mind? And my own son, it's a little, I think the audiobook would be good for him. I think that the pace and the density of text, he's only 10. I think that would be a little bit hard for him, but the audiobook, he would eat it alive. But I can think of some of my students who would really don't consider themselves readers, but they're the kids that just haven't found the book for them yet. And this, I think, will be the book for them. So there are a few in my head of kiddos. And I teach 11th grade right now, which means that they'd have it done in an afternoon. That's, when they want to focus, they really focus.
Yeah. I mean, I really tried to focus on a sort of almost like popcorn reading. I'm not talking about in a classroom sense, but popcorn reading and you want to reach for another piece of popcorn. Yes. You can't stop. Yeah. And so then I tried to, there are some longer chapters, but I try to have lots of chapter breaks and things that are constantly in motion all the time. And then it's layered. There's multiple layers of things that are happening. And each of the characters that are in the story have their own lives, and they sort of intersect at the same time, where they all have their own desires, their own goals. But those goals sometimes are in conflict with one another, what they both want. So it creates a lot of friction in the story.
Yeah, but not to the point where you're exhausted by it, as a reader. There have been books sometimes where they're big epic fantasies with a lot of action. And by the end, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can read the next one. This one is definitely okay, and then what happens? And then. And so it's that exactly like you're saying, that nom 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 of the popcorn. And yet there are a few things where I'm I got to go back and reread that because that was really cool. What did I miss? Because I went too fast. That is so cool. Well, so actually I have one final question for you. If you were to teach a unit in your classroom where you looked at Sky's End, what do you think you would cover? What do you think? I don't know. Do you teach with inquiry? We at Brave New Teaching talk about inquiry-based teaching, where you've got an essential question and the whole, your whole unit isn't necessarily based on a book, but it's based on exploring that question, and you can use the book as a vehicle towards that question. Do you have sort of a topic or theme or question that you might be able to explore and that you could use Sky's End as your material?
That's a great question. So, we do use Wicker. I don't know. That's a great question. I haven't really thought about how I would teach it because.
Well, yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
The problem is that because Sky's End's 14 and up. And so, and then I'm teaching below 14 usually. And so I haven't thought too hard on what I would actually focus on. But when I go into my library visits, one of the things that I really like to do is the selection of the 12 trades with my students. And so we talk about meritocracy and what that word means. What does merit mean? What is a meritocracy? We talk about what meritocracy means in our world. And that's probably where I would approach it if I was going to teach this. What does it look like in our world versus in Conrad's world? Could we do a Venn diagram? Could we compare the two, right? And then I talk about the dueling system, and then those who can't duel, or maybe they can duel, but they don't want to ever be challenged, they go through the selection system. And then I have the kids come up and then they randomly get selected to a trade. We talk about what each of the trades mean. So that's probably where I would approach it. I'd probably start it somewhere within the meritocracy and what that looks like in our world and what it causes people to do and who they become because of these things.
I wonder if there's a unit here. Well, actually, not I wonder. I'm hearing, or my brain is going towards some sort of a unit of study looking at the systems and government, or just the systems in which we operate, and how, to what extent those determine our fate, and how much agency any given person has in their future, given the systems in which they find them. I don't know. It's kind of.
And these characters in Sky's End, you'll see the fingerprints of what the meritocracy has done to each of them in a different way. So it'd be really good to do a character analysis for each character and kind of talk about why is this person this way, and then maybe there's some characters who claim that they're the same as Conrad. where like
Mhm.
maybe they aren't, but they say that they are the same, that the world made them this way kind of thing. And it would be really interesting to do a compare and contrast between those two.
That would be really cool. Well, I think that you should come and give a talk to my students because they are all over 14. So we'll just I'll just leave that little seed with you. Marc, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we've gone on kind of long, but I'm just so fascinated by your whole process and just by like how you're able to also stay so grounded and bring your students into the process of your book and like have them be a part of your writing world. Whereas I think some people would try to keep the two completely separate and never the two shall meet. It's very much like, this is who I am and I do both of these things and here we all are together. That's just so cool. So I just want to say thank you very much for sharing everything with our audience. And will you please tell the listeners of Brave New Teaching where they can get their copy of Sky's End and where they can connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. And thank you so much, Marie, for having me on. This has been fabulous. I love talking about it. And I loved how complimentary you were of Sky's End. I'm so proud of it. This has been a journey of mine that I've been trying for so long. And I'm just so grateful it's here. If you want to get Sky's End, it's in Barnes & Noble as of this week right now. Amazon. I always like it if you want to shop indie. There's indie bookstores. That's also a great resource. If you want to connect with me, I'm on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Threads as MJG_write, as in writer, right. And yeah.
Okay. Well, and we will have all of those linked in the show notes for this episode. So friends, if you are driving or something where you cannot immediately go and connect with Marc on Instagram or TikTok or get your copy in your shopping cart, head to the show notes for this episode and you will find all of the links there. So I just want to say thank you again. Congratulations on your book launch. Congratulations on turning in your edits for book number 2. I'm really excited. When does that one come out? Just asking for a friend.
That one it's spring 2025. It could be as early as January, but that's kind of the plan. So next January.
Okay. All right. I will pace myself with my excitement then. Well, thank you very much, Marc. And I hope that we will be able to have you on when book number 2 comes out because this is just fun.
That sounds fun. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.